disappear. So I've heard this story a couple times this morning, and I'm doing this just as a PSA, a public service announcement. And so we're on video record. If you're feeling ill, please don't come to church. So if I know we're gonna go through flu season. I know that COVID's getting more serious here in Natrona again. So I just want to remind you, if you're feeling ill, you can watch us online. Sit in the comfort of your living room, throw on YouTube, go to the website, casperchurch.com, go to Facebook, all the different places. You can watch church, participate. We don't want you coming here, and if there's any sort of like potential compromise. So here's what I'm getting at. Even if you're just like, ooh, I have a little tickle in my throat, just stay home. You can participate. We know where you are. We love you, and we want you to be safe. And we want to keep us safe. So that's just PSA for us. I know there's a handful that have made that decision this morning, and we appreciate that. It's okay. We're going to be in Genesis again. A few more weeks in Genesis. I think actually we're going to be in Genesis for 6 weeks total, counting today. We're still working through. We have all of Joseph to deal with. We have 2 more weeks of talking about Jacob, and I realize that I'm not going into a lot of nitty-gritty detail on these characters. I'm kind of hitting high points, things that I'm like wrestling with, or things that impact me, things that I think about. And so it's become like I'm not necessarily teaching on the life of these people. I'm preaching to some of the conceptual ideas that are happening within this text that I think are important for me, and then communicating to you. So, just as a reminder, it is important for you to continue to like parse out the story. Adults participating in adult discipleship, Sunday school, Bible hour, what's another fun name we could call it? Whatever we call that time that we have before church starts, they're going a little bit deeper onto the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of who's who, and I'm just glossing over a lot of it. I understand. There's a lot of words here. And so, anyway, I just want to remind you that. Also, again, I'm doing these midweek talks. That's just covering some other ideas or concepts. I throw it out there on Facebook or YouTube. You can watch that. It should be on our website also. And that's hitting some of the different points within the stories because there's just so much going on. This morning, we're going to talk about Jacob getting married a bunch of times and having a bunch of kids, which is still really strange. So I know there's still a handful of kids in here. This chapter we're dealing with, by the way, has some kind of heavy content in it. I'm just letting you know about having a bunch of babies with a bunch of different ladies, and that's pretty intense. So anyway, just giving you fair warning. When I read this, it is the Bible. It's not, I didn't make it up. Actually, today, too, if you have a bulletin, we're going to crank a few blanks. I have some blanks to crank today. So some questions at the end of the talk time where I just want to kind of recalibrate and let's crank a few blanks. Okay, that's a lot of prelude to another prelude to another prelude. I don't even know if I ever actually get to a talk. I just kind of talk. I need to start structuring the message a little bit more 3-point oriented, so it's not just me kind of like verbalizing my innermost secrets and my darkest desires and my biggest hurts. But last night, I couldn't sleep. And that happens a lot to me when, not because of psychological things or like, but it was a strange week in the Faisal household. You know, people are getting older, and you're coming to reality of that. It was birthday week, and like, but then I had coffee really late last night, and so like it's 12 o'clock, and I can't sleep. And when you guys can't sleep at 12 o'clock, like when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, I could turn on the radio. And so that's how I became a Giants fan. I'm not a San Francisco Giants fan right now anymore just because I can't be. But I grew up a San Francisco Giants fan because when I would turn on the radio, when I couldn't sleep at night, especially on the weekends, like a Friday or Saturday night, it sounded like I had a phone I could play with or an iPad I could lay on my belly and play Candy Crush or whatever you guys do. or like all those different things that happen that now that we can distract ourselves with while we're in bed, I would turn the radio on and I would listen to the Giants. Well, in the 80s, the Giants were an incredible baseball team. Went to the World Series a lot. I was a huge fan. My favorite player growing up was Will Clark. He's the first baseman for the Giants. In my office, I have a couple autographs. You ever want to stop and look? Hey, it's there. Anyway, last night, I couldn't sleep. Giants aren't on the radio. I don't even have a radio in our room. So I did what most 21st century people do. I pulled out my phone. And I don't know if you guys do this, but every now and again, I Google search myself. You guys Google search yourself ever? Here's why I Google search myself. Did you hear the news yesterday about, and this isn't like a comedy hour, I'm just saying, did you hear the news about the pastor from the flight from Las Vegas to Detroit, our city, Detroit, where we love? Oh my goodness. So, and now I'm interested in who this pastor is. So a pastor, he urinated on a passenger on a plane, on a flight, and was arrested, and it's a news story. Now everybody's getting out their phone and like, let me look it up. But it's described as a famous pastor from a certain state. I'm not even going to get into it because it's all recorded now. But anyway, I Googled myself to see like, hey, am I a famous pastor who urinated on someone? You know, those are the kinds of things that I'm like sleeping, like trying to go to sleep, and I start Googling myself. So when I Google myself, because I'm a public figure because my name is on a website, and my name is on YouTube because of this. So if you Google my name now, or if anybody does this, now with Facebook, you are in searches. So you Google your own name, you just have fun with it tonight, you'll find all kinds of things about you, maybe things you didn't know, maybe things you already did know. Anyway, they're now, because of a series of talking on camera to people, there is an entire catalog of videos of me. Okay, well, what you probably know about me is I'm sick. I listen to myself every week after I preach 3 times. Most guys don't do that because they're scared of what they said. I do it because I'm scared of what I said. And I take this craft very seriously. I think it's important to make sure that I'm communicating, that I'm saying something that's truthful, saying something that's inspiring, saying something that helps move our church down the road maybe a little bit, and sometimes it's theological, sometimes it's practical, sometimes it's like we're cranking some blanks today, sometimes it's inspiring, but the point is, am I saying something that's worth listening to? So I work on that. And that's kind of a gross thing to do because you have to listen to nobody likes to hear their own voice, right? So, but because I already had that as part of my system, I started scrolling back prior to coming to Casper Alliance Church to watch those videos. So last night at like 12:45, I'm watching myself preach from like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And I had this observation. Why didn't somebody tell me? Was the thing that I was thinking. Why didn't somebody tell me? Now, it could have been virtually anything. Why didn't somebody tell me my hair was like that? Why didn't somebody tell me my beard was too long? Why didn't somebody tell me that you have gotten grossly overweight? I almost there's a picture of me like at the bottom part of my ministry life where I felt the saddest and the most depressed, and this is just me being transparent, where I was preaching on a Sunday morning and I was massive. Now you guys have watched me lose and gain since I've been here. I'm actively trying to lose again, and I'm running and I'm doing all those things. But in this picture, I know how much I weigh. It was like 360 plus pounds. And I'm going, and no one told me. Like, why didn't somebody tell me? Like, pull me aside and been like, you're getting a little fat. We don't do that, do we? It would have been nice. It would have been emotionally, like, traumatic. It would have been hard. It would have been tough for me to hear. But I would have taken my shirt off and looked at myself in the mirror and said, you know what? You are right. I'm getting pretty big. I think at that point I was showering in a poncho just because I didn't want to have to see myself. But like, that was a joke. But there's those things where you're like, nobody told me this. Why didn't you tell me? Now, I get really irritated at Adrienne because she always tells me my zipper's down. In fact, just a little bit ago I talked to her because I had to go rub the mullet. I had to rub the mullet. It's good luck. You rub Andrew's mullet, it feels so good. I just like squeeze the back of his head, and he looks at me like he's a puppy. And like, I just rub his mullet. It's a joke. So I went in there because I was a little annoyed about something, and I rubbed his mullet, and it made me laugh. And Adrienne says this phrase to me. She goes, "You need to tuck your shirt in." I'm like, "Why?" "Don't give the touchdown sign." I'm like, "Oh." And that irritates me. But the point is she actually tells me. She tells me, and I appreciate that now more. But last night I'm watching myself, and I went through all these videos, and there's all these different things about me that I started to point out and find and go, why didn't somebody tell me that? Why didn't somebody say this to me? Why didn't somebody let me know that I looked ridiculous? Why didn't, not just about weight, but like what I was wearing. Why didn't somebody tell me that like you shouldn't wear that shirt? It's not flattering. Stick with plaids. Plaids change the shape of your body. Or like I had this beard, it was like this long. You guys remember when I came here, right? It was like this long. But then I had a high fade. So like from here to here was skin. It was the strangest look. Nobody said anything to me. That's just, like we're uncomfortable. There's a point to this. As I'm watching, I was starting to feel more depressed and more like, and I couldn't sleep because I was getting more frustrated. I'm like, why is it? I got to call a couple churches and have them delete these things. But they're still like some of the most viewed videos on their website, which feels good too, right? But I even listened to the content of what I was saying. I'm like, I wasn't listening to myself very well then either. I was just being me without Jesus. And I could hear that. And I was like, how come nobody said anything about that? Now, those are all kind of funny and silly, but it's real. We don't like to tell each other when things are going wrong or we don't like to talk about that stuff. Take it even a step further. What about sin? You ever seen sin in somebody's life? It's really hard to bring that up to someone and say, listen, I think what you've done is sinful, and you need to deal with it. Or the way in which you're living is sinful. You need to deal with it. We're so uncomfortable confronting one another or saying things to one another that could be potentially hurtful or wound them that we'll always avoid the sin stuff. We will never call a spade a spade. In the story of Jacob, nobody said, hey, Jacob, you're a dirtbag and you need to stop. You're evil and you need to stop. You're sinning and you need to stop. No one. Where was the dad to say stop it? Where was grandpa to come along at Christmas and Thanksgiving and look and go, do you act like this all year? In the story of Jacob's life, you have a pattern of behavior, a pattern of sin, a pattern of deception and self-centeredness and wanting what I want the most to where it's destructive and hurtful and painful and causes chaos and creates negative scenarios everywhere he goes. And as we read the story of Jacob and as we have read and continue to read next week, you'll just see that chaos and strife and gross things find him wherever he goes. And it's not random. It's because he has a pattern of sin in his life. But he's a patriarch of faith. What that should remind us this morning is that in spite of us, God uses us. In spite of who you are and who you're becoming and the way you live your life and how you've treated people and how you've made decisions and the things that you're doing, God's purposes are still moving. And when you have a relationship with Him, you are part of those purposes. And there are times when your purposes are probably not as obvious, and there's times when they are so apparent to you that you just feel like you're standing right in the middle of God's will, and everything is working out the way that it's supposed to. And you see God's glory shine around you, and people come to know Jesus around you. And the good things are happening around you, not for you, but for the kingdom. And then that's when, but God still is moving His purposes. Always. Forever. He doesn't pause. He's not checking out. He didn't take a 2020 vacation. His purposes are still moving. But in the midst of all that, are we being dirtbags like Jacob? And as this story unfolds a little bit, we'll see how this morning specifically, God is really beginning to set the stage for accomplishing what he wants to accomplish and fulfilling some of the covenants that he had established with Grandpa Abraham. So hear this. We're going to be in verse 20. We'll be in chapter 29, and there's a lot of words, but this is like a big story. And then it gets into just polygamy, which, by the way, little side note, even as a kid, sitting through Sunday school, and by the way, I have flannel graph. We'll get more flannel graph up here. I'm sorry I haven't put the Jacob flannel graph up yet. I'm sorry. But having the Sunday school teacher talk about Jacob in these stories, I remember being a 7 or 8 year old going, how many times did he get married? And that's okay. God's okay with that? That's part of God's plan? How is that even a thing? Like, does that mean I'm supposed to get married multiple times? Like, I can barely handle one. And we all know that. All of us men, we know it. You can't do it. And you're all bad husbands. Just remember, you're all bad husbands, all of you. And apologize when you get home today. And all you young boys, you're going to be bad husbands too. And you need to apologize. Learn to practice saying, I'm sorry. Jerem, say it right now, I'm sorry. Say, I'm sorry. But even as a kid, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. Like, what was that all about? What's God doing? But listen to this story, starting with chapter 29. Then Jacob went on his journey. Now, remember, this is right after he had the dream where God showed him heaven, and the angels were going up and down, and he had that kind of moment with God. He's like, oh, surely God is with me. And then, just to recap, I'm sorry. And then he's like made all these stipulations that, like, when you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and then you do this, and then I have some clothes, and I have some food, then you'll be my God. He made all these rules for God to follow so that he could be his God. This is where we pick up on the story. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of the well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large. And when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, my brothers, where do you come from? They said, we are from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. And he said to them, is it well with him? They said, it is well. And see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with sheep. Like, that's an important part, right? Like, they're like getting ready to water sheep and like, check her out. Immediately setting the stage for Jacob to like move into this area of like, I spy Rachel with my little eye, and I'm going to steal her for my pleasure. That's what's happening right now. And the shepherds are accomplices in this. He said, behold, it is still high day. It's not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep, go pasture them. But they said, we cannot until the flocks are gathered together, and the stone is rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. What did Jacob just do? He just like grunted and showed how strong he was and kind of like ripped open his shirt and was like, watch me move the rock myself. That's what happened. He was showing off. This is like the first like bar scene where the man walked up to the lady and was like, check it out. I can fight and I can do these things. This is what's happening. He's showing off his strength. He's going, look what I can do because I'm going to win you. While he was still speaking with them, I just read that. I'm sorry, this is why I need glasses. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel's daughter, the Laban's mother, sheep, blah, blah, verse 11. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Didn't ask for permission. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him into the house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. It's a weird thing to compare somebody's blindness to somebody's physical features. The writer here is really trying to create this gap between the two sisters. Leah, she's over here. She's got some good qualities, but mostly she's just blind. But wait, Rachel, hot. I have a poster of Rachel I'd like to show you. This is what's happening. The biblical author is creating this difference between the two for purpose. For purpose. We'll get to that here in just a second. Verse 18, Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for time my time is completed." So Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is it you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Now, the deceiver has just been deceived. He's been tricked. And Laban goes on to say, "I'm married. I can't give you my younger. I got to give you my older daughter." So that what could happen? Let's keep going. Verse 28, Jacob did so and completed this after he agreed to do the week. Then Laban gave him the daughter Rachel. So he worked another 7 years. And later gave his female Bilhah to his daughter and Rachel to her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved her more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. So Jacob ended up getting what he wanted, but Laban got 14 years of work from Jacob for this. So he manipulated Jacob into serving, to working, to being a part of his land, to be a shepherd. And why is that important? Well, first of all, it's showing that God, regardless of our lot and where we are and what we're doing, He's still moving and shaping and working purposes out. And Jacob, being a deceiver, was deceived himself. Now, some people go, "Well, that's divine karma." No, it's not. It's not divine. There's no such thing. God's not going, "You know what? Since you stole the birthright, since you lied, since you pretended to be your brother, since of all of these things that happened before, I'm going to go ahead and punish you this way by giving you..." That's not what happened. That's not what happened. All of this right here is shaping Jacob to be the Jacob at the end of the story that we're going to get to in next week. But these incidents, this stuff that's happening right now, this kind of chaotic life that Jacob's leading, this being stuck in this world, is shaping him so that he will be able to be the man that God intended him to be. Humble, loving, and equipped to handle the things that God's going to put on his plate to come. Now Jacob's stubborn, and he's a liar, and he's a cheater, and he's selfish, and he thinks self-centeredly. And why didn't anybody come along and tell him to stop? Say, "Why are you doing this? Why are you sinning constantly? Why are you so selfish?" Nobody did that, because people don't like to do that to each other. But you know what happens is usually people take advantage of people who are failing or who are sinning. They actually manipulate themselves, just like Laban did. And it begins this cycle. Now, what happens here? Chapter 30, verse 1 through 24 is all about the kids, Jacob and sons. When the Lord saw Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called him Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, now, this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name will be called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. Now, recognize a couple of those. Reuben, Simeon, they're kind of cool names, but there's 2 really important names there. One is what? Levi. The other one is Judah. From this line of Leah comes Judah. From the line of Judah comes the Lion of Judah, who is Jesus. Again, this is fulfilling the promises, the covenant that God made with Abraham. From your line, from you, your family, from all of the sands of the seashore, that all these kids that you're going to have, I will bring about a blessing. I will bring about restoration. I will bring about life through your line. And all of the nations will be blessed. All of the nations. And from that, you have priests, Levi, and you have Judah, Jesus, right here. But wait, there's more. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said, Jacob, give me children, or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, here's my servant Bilhah, go into her. Still, manipulation, continual manipulation, so that she may give birth on my behalf. And even I have children through her. She gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. And Jacob went into her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her Jacob as a wife. Now, how many wives does this guy have? 4. That's a lot of Thanksgiving dinners to attend to. There is a lot happening here. But why? Why is all of this sin begetting sin, begetting sin, begetting sin? And now God, we're going to get into this in just a second and we're going to finish. God is establishing something pretty dramatic here, but at the same time, humanity, the people in the story, the wives in the story are trying to contrive and get what they want out of their own selfish desire, out of their own wants. They're jealous of one another. And God's closing a womb and opening a womb and closing a womb and opening, and they're giving servants off, and they're trying to, because they're competing with one another, because Jacob must be this amazing human being. They all want Jacob's love and affection, and hopefully I'll be attached to Jacob. Well, here, there's 2 things there. One is this selfish self-preservation, right, that the women are having. They want to be attached to Jacob because with Jacob comes prosperity, with Jacob comes security, with Jacob comes land and servants and all of these things that are good. But also, there's this one underlying thing that's happening with Jacob. Jacob is attached to who? Yahweh. And there's still that thing that's leaking out of him. The people of God, they can't help it. When you love God, even though you're not very good at it, you still leak His truth and His life and who He is to people. And I'm convinced that these women, they wanted to be attached for selfish and like their own kind of like self-preservation ways, but also they were wanting to link up because there's something about Jacob that's different, that's special, but it's also in this line from Abraham who God actually spoke to, so he's important. But it should show us that as we are people of God, we have this destiny path that we're living on because God is completing his purposes. And if you have relationship with it, you're on the path with him. Now, it might not always look great. It might look like 4 wives and 12 kids and a daughter. It might look like chaos. It might look like having to be a slave for 14 years working for some guy you don't really like all that much just because you want to hook up with his kid. It's all these chaotic things, but at the end of the day, God is still moving the story along so that he could be a blessing. And out of all of these kids come an entire nation. And that's what happens here. God builds a nation out of 12 kids, 12 tribes. The 12 tribes. And they become kingdoms, and they get the northern kingdom, the southern, and there's an entire history that takes place because of chapter 29 and 30 of Genesis. And God establishes not only his heavenly kingdom through the promise to Abraham, but he establishes earthly kingdom through the 12 tribes. And he uses them to move his story along and to continue to teach the nations who he is. And if we were to go, as we get into Joseph, it's going to be more fun to talk about what happens and how these different, and I didn't even talk about Joseph being born yet, but do you think in the moment, anyone can see what's actually happening? No. They have no picture, no vision, no sense of what God's doing. It's this human agenda of sin and self-preservation. And God's redeeming it and using it and establishing his presence regularly in these people. Last night when I was watching one of my talks from like 2016 or something like that, 15 maybe, I was wearing a Dickies like quadruple X shirt. It looked like I put a sailboat sail on. And it was, which you shouldn't canoe if you're a 4Xer, by the way. The canoe story is the new Wendy's. Oh my goodness! But I was looking at myself on stage, and it just was a block of a human, like just a big square on stage. And I listened to the talk, and I knew all of a sudden I was able to like download what was going on in my life at that point because I was listening to it. And I think everybody does that when you go back and look at pictures of your past life, and you go look at a picture of Thanksgiving 20 years ago, and you're like, oh, I remember that. I remember that conversation. Oh, I remember Grandma yelled at us because you have you have a story with the picture, and a lot of people can do that. I think most of us can do that. There's like a memory that's seared into your mind. Now, if you were here last week, you'll connect to this. And I didn't do this on purpose. This is because I couldn't sleep, and I Google searched my name, and I ended up with all these videos. But last week, I referenced a family that used to encourage me, the Crosies. And I would listen to this message, and I could see on the video, I could see the bald head that I referenced last week and this week that I was watching. One was I don't know if you remember that story. Anyway, I remember because I remember the content, and I remember after watching the service afterwards, because that's what I do, I remember going, oh my goodness, why did I wear that shirt? Because the stage was blue, and like it was like a head on a pair of khaki pants. It was like I green screened my body out of it, but I knew it. I remember thinking that. But I remember the content of the talk. And I remember that's one of the talks where John and Gloria came up to me after church and said, God has called you to a greater ministry. He has called you to be a communicator. And I remember feeling really dumb about the way I looked. And I remember them telling me. Now, the content of the message was meaningless to me last night, but it seared itself into that whole story that I shared last week about being encouraged. And I had this kind of moment last night where I was like, oh, God has used all of this stuff from like 1998 to now to begin to shape, no matter what, so it was whatever part of the timeline I drop in, and I feel my chaos, and I feel my sin, and I feel my self-centeredness, and I'm not unique in that. We're all that way. You all have that timeline where God is working. If you have a relationship with Him, and you can go through your story arc, and you can figure out all of these points where God kind of shifted based on your failures, based on your successes, and continued to move His purposes along. And you can think about relationships that you had, and you can think about ways that you had conversations with people, and you can think about all of these different things on your timeline. Well, this is what God's doing, always, from the beginning of time. He has started the parade at creation, and He will end it at the new creation when heaven and earth collide, and there's a new heaven and a new earth. And we get to live on that timeline. We get to live it every single day. And the issue is, are you aware of God's presence in that timeline? I know that there's times where we're not. I know there's times where we feel so lost and so desperate and so confused and so broken and so whatever that we're not even tuned into that. And then God grabs you and shakes you and says, come back to me, son. Come back to me, daughter. And says, you are firmly placed in this path that I'm creating for you. See, the thing is, many of us, when we see the big blue Dickies shirt and we go, oh, we stop and we feel down and we feel depressed and we feel lost and we feel like, oh, I failed. And we have a tough time getting out of that. You ever wonder why there's so many stories about barrenness in Scripture? God, there's a great picture out there. I saw it this last week, and I probably, if I was really good at multimedia, I should have thrown it up there for you, but God has used barrenness to show who He is over and over and over again through the Scriptures, to reveal His power and authority on His timeline. You don't get to just go have kids when you want to have kids. I'm going to take away the fruit of the womb, and I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to take it away, I'm going to bring it back, so that I can show you who God is. So I can show you whose timeline you're living. What's the big famous line from Joseph that we're going to get into? What man intended for what? Evil. God turned into... That's the story of God. Now, let's crank a few blanks real quick. There's one typo, I noticed it, but it's crank and blank number 2 has a typo. It should say your. Are you able to see? I should get my blanks so I can remember them. I've talked a lot. Are you able to see the big picture of what God's doing? Are you able to see the big picture? Not your little individual picture. Now, if you put yourself into the story of Jacob, Jacob is dealing with his individual story right there, trying to manage and manipulate and get the thing he wants out of the story. The wives in the story were trying to do the same thing. They were managing their story so that they could get the thing that they wanted. But can you see the big picture of what God's doing? Now, in that, God redeems all the time if you love Him and you have a relationship with Him. So did God redeem Jacob's story? Absolutely. He created a nation out of all this chaos and polygamy and multiple kids and multiple wives. But are you able to see the big picture? Now, what does that require of us? How do we see the big picture? Well, sometimes we just got to stop and we just got to ask. And we got to say, God, show me. Show me what you're doing. Number 2, what is actually hindering your vision? What's hindering your vision? One of my favorite verses, and this is not any pastoral hyperbole, it really is one of my favorite verses. Hebrews 12 has the word hinder in it, and I love it. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings, but the other word is hinders us. So closely that, and let us run with endurance the race set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. What hinders you? And most of the time, the thing that's hindering us is sin. It's a different set of glasses that we put on, and all we can see is the ugh. A lot of us who have a tendency, and I've talked about this before, have to be a half-empty type of thinker. Like me, I'm a half-empty thinker. I think about things negatively first, and I have to myself up to think positively. When I put the 20/20 glasses on, I think negative. We're all going down. And that's how I see the world. Everything's horrible, and we're all going to be socialists, and it's going to be the worst. That's me. That's the way I think. But sin has a tendency to color your glasses in a way to where chaos ensues in your world. And what you're trying to do is self-preserve because that's all you see. All you see is like the chaos around you. All you see is the sin around you. What's hindering your vision? There's other things that hinder our vision. And I'll tell you what, like even though like there's been times in our world where Adrienne and I have been on mountaintop, right? You know sometimes what hinders our vision about family is teenagers. Man, teenagers are the worst. They like screw your whole life up. Except for yours, Leah, you're amazing. But teenagers, they wreck your days, right? They're like, all of a sudden they decide today's the day I'm going to change your world. Okay, let's do it. There's things like that, like, and you have, even though you're great, even though you have, let's say you did devotions all week, right? Let's say you had a great week of devotions. And then you decide to go 43 on a 30 on Friday afternoon. And you get a ticket for $181. Let's say that were to happen to you. Hypothetically, I heard a friend, that happened to a friend, right on 15th, like really close to where somebody would live. I mean, why is 13 over a $181 ticket in this town? That doesn't make any sense. I don't even care. He was happy to give it to me. I had devotions all week. I was doing good. But no. So then all of a sudden, I came home and I was like, brr. That's how I was. Adrienne just laughed. It's okay. I've thrown that before. I might throw it at you someday. But that's what happens. And where's my notes? I don't use notes. You know that. I got the one I needed. What's hindering your vision? Sometimes it's simple like a speeding ticket, and it just changes your day so much that you're just mad at everybody for the rest of the night. You can't function very well. Sometimes it's you get hit by another person, they run a stop sign. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Accidents happen, right? Does that hinder your vision? It's not always sin. Number 3, what steps do you need to take? Now, this is personal. What steps do you need to take to be able to see? To be able to see. Everybody needs to be taking a step. All of us. We don't get the excuse. Taking a step to be able to open up and be able to clearly see. Maybe that's you need to go to bed a little bit earlier tonight. Maybe it's you need to not drink coffee at 7:30 so you're not up all night. I mean, I got a sermon illustration out of it, but at the same time, it wasn't good for my body to be going to bed at 2 in the morning. There's steps that we can be taking. Maybe it's you need to get involved in a group and like start to connect with people at the church and take another step in church family so you can have somebody to hold you accountable. Maybe you've been struggling in your discipleship and like, am I really growing? And you can join Chris and Hannah as they're like helping lead people into deeper devotional life and deeper walk with the Lord and exploring what that looks like. There's all sorts of things. Maybe you struggle with like just even understanding what God has for you. Well, hey, call me and I'll fake it for you. I'll tell you. But everybody needs to take a step. There's things that or there's things in your life you're ignoring. Like what if somebody would have told Jacob, like, hey, buddy, I don't know if you should be like hanging out with your wife's servant also. Maybe Zilpah's not that great. Maybe take a hard pause on like hooking up with other girls. Now God redeemed it, right? God's going to, if you're in a relationship with the Lord, if you love Jesus, not going to make it perfect, but you're on the path. And redemption is part of your story as well. Last question. Do you feel like God is present in your life? Now, feel That's not a great Wyoming word. Maybe some of our Colorado Springs friends could help us with feelings. If you have struggled with the word feel, sorry, but do you know God is present in your life? Do you sense God's presence in your life? Do you care if God is present in your life? Because even just caring will take you a step. But can you feel God's activity in your life? Now, I tend to think when Jacob was going through his space and his world and creating this beautiful family of 5 trillion, that he wasn't like, oh, I sense God's presence right now. I'd like to have another kid out of wedlock. I totally sense God's presence in my life. No, I don't think that was going on. And I think there's times in our life where we've been sinful, where we can go, whoa, God's not there. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. That's why I'm sorry or confession is such a critical part of the Christian life, the following with the Lord, the wrestling with God. Wrestling with God where we get to just have this kind of fight and say, oh, I screwed up and I'm sorry. And but it's still, I had the right to do that. And we wrestle with the Lord and God grabs us and He reminds us that we're His and He loves us and He forgives us and He turns us and pushes us back out the nest so that we can continue to live and walk with Him. Because I promise if we're on the path, if you have a relationship with the Lord, you will just leak God and Jesus to everybody you go, to where people will go, you're not a great person, but there's something inside of you that says that you have something special. That God redeems people because He is going to be a redeemer. And He will redeem His creation because He's the redeemer. And it's His plan, His purposes, His creation that He's fixing. We just get to participate a little bit. You are not the king of the universe. Nor am I. We get to do this with the Lord's hand on us. That's why it's such a joy to walk with Him, or to wrestle with Him, or to be a part of His story, or to have Him forgive us, and to understand our depravity and where we are, and to be free of that sin, and to live life. And Jacob, the story of, we just kind of stopped with Abraham, and he died. And then we didn't even really get into it, but he's just gone. But Jacob, as we get into Joseph, continues to cycle back. And we get to hear, we get to talk, and we get to see Jacob's life unfold as he gets older, in front of his kids, in front of his son, and he gets restored. And it's fun what's going to happen in the next 5-6 weeks as Joseph takes the main stage for our Sunday morning. Let me crank those blanks for you one more time. Are you able to see the big picture of what God's doing? Now, these are things that I can't give you the answer. I can give you some directions, but you got to start wrestling with that on your own. Are you able to see the big picture of what God's doing? What is hindering your vision? Is it sin? Is it frustration? Is it getting a speeding ticket on a Friday? What's hindering your vision of God? What closes the glasses up so you can't see Him working? And what steps do you need to take to see what God's doing? What steps do you need to take? Finally, do you feel, do you sense, do you know God's presence in your life? Do you know it? Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this morning. Thank you that we could get together as a church family again. Lord, again, we're praying for 1,000 people to come to know you. Lord, I pray that people in this church would be part of that story of 1,000 people accepting your name and having a relationship with you. Lord, continue to stir us up so that we can know you are the Lord of our life, that we can sense your presence, know your presence, experience your presence in our life. Lord, help us to cast off all the things that hinder us from running with endurance with you, towards you, in relationship with you. Lord, reveal your story to us daily. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's close with the doxology this morning. Somebody want to a cappella start it?
Praise God.